Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something that it feels a little bit like time travel, but it's actually just, well, it's just strictly adhering to the reality of the stack of sources in front of
It
us.
is, yeah.
We are stepping right into the present moment of our source material. The date stamped on these documents is February 11th, 2026.
It is a very specific and, frankly, a very heavy date. It carries a lot of weight.
It is massive. And honestly, just physically looking at the stack we have today, I
Yeah.
mean, you have the blog post from this anonymous source, Face. You have the situation reports from Berlin and London, the strategy documents from the opposition leaders. It feels weighty.
It does.
It doesn't feel like some abstract political theory. It feels like we are standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a geopolitical landscape that is shifting and shifting violently while we watch.
That heaviness you're feeling is, I think, it's likely the convergence of three things.
Yeah.
You've got scale, you've got desperation, and you've got opportunity, all hitting at the same time.
Yeah.
The documents we are analyzing today aren't just op-eds or, think piece fluff. They are essentially roadmaps for the collapse of a 47-year-old regime.
Roadmaps, that's exactly the right word.
And the premise of everything we're reading is that this collapse isn't 5 years away. In this timeline, in this February 2026, it is imminent. It's happening right now.
So let's set the scene before we get into the heavy strategy, just to ground ourselves and everyone listening. It's February 2026. What does the world look like according to these sources? Because reading this, I have to admit, my heart rate went up a little bit.
It should. It's extremely tense. We are looking at high-level friction across the entire Middle East. The sources describe severe internet blackouts across Iran, which historically is pretty standard operating procedure for the regime when they get scared.
Right. It's the cover of darkness. They shut off the cameras before they do something they don't want the world to see.
Exactly. When the lights go out on the digital network, it usually means something very bad is happening on the streets.
Hmm.
But the difference here, in this specific stack, is the reaction. It's what's happening on the outside.
How so?
You have this blog post titled Advocating for Dialogue Over War, which, on the surface, sounds soft, almost pacifist, but the content is it's explosive.
It really is.
And simultaneously, you have reports of the Iranian diaspora mobilizing in numbers that we haven't seen since, well, maybe ever.
That was the first thing that jumped out at me. The sheer numbers. We are talking about Berlin, February 2026. The sources cite estimates of up to 100,000 people.
At the Brandenburg Gate, a hugely symbolic location.
In February. In Germany. I mean, I've been to Berlin in February. It is not a place you go for a casual stroll. It is bone-chillingly cold.
No, it's freezing. It's absolutely miserable.
So 100,000 people standing in the freezing cold is not a picnic. It's not a festival. It's a statement of intent. And that's really our mission today, isn't it? We need to unpack this whole outside-in revolution concept.
We do.
We need to understand how a blog post written by a former Obama volunteer calling for dialogue reconciles with 100,000 people in the street screaming for regime change.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do those two things fit together?
It really is. And then we need to look at the two major architects of this proposed future, Reza Pahlavi and Maryam, because they have very, very different blueprints for what happens the day after the regime falls.
And that difference is absolutely critical. It's not just, oh, everyone wants freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fundamental clash of methodologies.
Right.
You have the monarchist or nationalist approach on one side, and you have the organized resistance or MAK approach on the other.
And if you don't understand the friction between those two,
If you don't understand that friction, you don't understand the risk of what comes next. The whole thing could fall apart from the inside.
it's the difference between a controlled demolition and a chaotic collapse.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so let's start with the thesis. This comes primarily from that Face source. The title is Advocating for Dialogue Over War. Now, knowing the geopolitical climate in this 2026 scenario, with the regime reportedly killing thousands and thousands of protesters, the word dialogue feels almost naive or counterintuitive. Is this appeasement?
And that's the immediate reaction most people would have, right?
Yeah.
You hear dialogue with a regime that's shooting its own people, and you think Chamberlain in 1938.
Exactly. Peace in our time.
But the source frames it very, very differently. This author, they claim to be a former Obama volunteer, so they are coming from a background steeped in community organizing and diplomacy. Their central argument isn't about being nice, it's about what they call Iranian ownership.
Let's unpack that phrase, Iranian ownership. What does that mean in a practical, on-the-ground sense?
It means that for a new democracy to actually stick, to be legitimate in the eyes of history, and more importantly in the eyes of the Iranian people, it cannot be a gift from the United States military. It absolutely cannot be Iraq 2003. It cannot be Afghanistan.
Because if the U.S. rolls in with tanks, the narrative shifts immediately. The story changes in an instant.
Instantly.
Yeah.
If the U.S. is the aggressor, the regime, the Islamic Republic, gets to play the victim card. They can pivot to their base and say, look, the great Satan is here to destroy Islam, to destroy Iran. It validates 40-plus years of their propaganda.
It's the I told you so moment for the hardliners?
Exactly. The source argues that the moment an American boot hits the ground as an invader, the revolution is tainted. It's compromised before it even begins.
So the U.S. has to stay in the passenger seat?
Even further back, the source argues the U.S. has to be in the back seat, maybe even in the trunk. The U.S. must remain a supporting actor. You can provide technology like the satellite internet, Starlink, which we'll talk about later. Maybe you protect civilians at the UN level with resolutions, but you never, ever drive the car.
The driver has to be Iranian.
The driver must be Iranian, no question.
Okay. So if we aren't driving and we aren't shooting, what does this dialogue actually look like in practice? Because the source breaks it down into 3 distinct levels, and I have to be honest, the first one seems like a complete non-starter to me. Bilateral dialogue with the regime.
It does seem futile, I agree.
Yeah.
Especially given the history. I mean, we've been trying to talk to them for decades with very little to show for it, but the source argues you have to engage even if you know it will likely fail.
Why? What's the point?
It's about exhausting the option. It's about gaining the moral high ground on the world stage. You have to be able to stand up in front of the UN and say to the world, we tried to talk. We offered a path. They chose violence.
Okay, so it's a strategic checkbox. You do it to prove it doesn't work.
Partly, but the more important levels are the second and third. Level 2 is dialogue among Iranians. And this is a huge one. It's about unifying that fragmented opposition we mentioned. Because right now, in this 2026 scenario, they are shouting at each other almost as much as they are shouting at the regime.
The united front, that isn't so united.
Precisely. You can't replace a dictatorship with a civil war among the liberators. So that dialogue is about building a coalition before the power vacuum opens up.
And level 3.
Level 3 is multilateral dialogue. That's getting the EU, the G7, the UN Security Council, everyone on the same page. It's about building a containment wall of diplomacy around the regime.
Squeezing them.
Squeezing them, isolating them so completely that they have no friends left to call, no economic lifelines, no one to sell their oil to. It's about making the status quo so painful that the internal pressure from the people becomes unbearable.
But there is a crucial component to this dialogue strategy that takes a sharp, and I have to say, almost bizarre turn in the source text.
It's a big turn.
And we have to address it because it pivots from, standard geopolitics to theology in a way I did not see coming.
No, it's the curveball of the century. It really is.
So this is section 2 of our stack. I have to say, when I read this part, I had to double check that I was still reading a political analysis. The source, Burkeface, goes into this deep, aggressive theological critique of the regime itself.
It is highly, highly controversial. And we need to be crystal clear here. As analysts, we are unpacking the source's argument. We are not endorsing or validating their theology.
Absolutely. We're reporting on the source.
But to understand their political strategy, you have to understand their spiritual diagnosis of the problem. The source explicitly argues that the regime's tyranny isn't just about corruption or power or oil. They say it's rooted in what they call Islamic doctrines and spiritual tyranny.
They use extremely harsh language. I mean, they explicitly refer to the regime's version of Islam as a construct of the devil designed to mislead. That's not something you usually see in a policy paper from a think tank.
No, it's a metaphysical stance. It's not political science anymore. It's theology. The argument is that the regime operates on a compliance or death dynamic. The source frames it as a historical narrative of conquest, convert or die, or, in this modern case, submit to the supreme leader or die.
So it's coercion at its very core.
Total coercion. The source contrasts this with their own view of a benevolent God who allows free will and choice. They argue that the Ayatollah isn't just a dictator in the political sense, like a Pinochet or a Franco. They believe he is, and this is a direct quote, enslaved to deeper spiritual forces.
So they're diagnosing the problem as spiritual possession, essentially, or kind of deep spiritual corruption?
Spiritual corruption is the better term. They argue that the violence, the hanging of protesters from cranes, the brutal oppression of women, the mass killings, is a feature, not a bug, of the regime's theology. It's the logical outcome of their worldview.
So if the problem is diagnosed as spiritual, the solution has to be spiritual too. It can't just be about elections and constitutions.
According to this source, yes. That's why their vision for the new Iran is so aggressively secular in its governance, but is rooted in the principle of absolute religious freedom. They want to strip the state of any and all religious coercion.
Which would mean?
No death penalty for apostasy, for leaving Islam, no mandatory hijab, no morality police. The goal is to break the spiritual monopoly that the mullahs have held for nearly half a century. Religion becomes a private choice, not a state mandate.
Well, here's the curveball. This is where the whole thing goes from surprising to just shocking. This spiritual logic leads the source to suggest a geopolitical partner that I think 99% of our listeners, and frankly 99% of the world, would never ever guess.
Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin.
It is a wild connection. It absolutely stops you in your tracks when you're reading it.
Walk me through this. Help me understand. The source wants a secular, free, democratic Iran. They want to end tyranny. And they think the guy who invaded Ukraine, the guy who is essentially a pariah in the West, is the key to unlocking it. How does that math possibly work?
It relies entirely and completely on that spiritual framework we just discussed. It has nothing to do with Putin's politics or his actions in Ukraine.
Okay.
The source notes that Putin identifies as an Orthodox Christian. Now, whether you or I or anyone else believes Putin is sincere in his faith is completely irrelevant to the source's argument.
The source takes his public identity at face value for this.
For this specific purpose, yes. The source argues that because Putin publicly affirms the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, which are core tenets of Christianity, that the source claims the Islamic regime's theology denies or distorts, he has a specific type of leverage that a Western leader doesn't.
So wait, while a U.S. diplomat is in a room talking about sanctions or nuclear enrichment percentages, the idea is that Putin could theoretically talk to the Ayatollah about theology, about the nature of God.
That's the theory. It's that wild. The source suggests the West is too secular, too post-religious to reach a theocrat. We speak the language of GDP, human rights, and international law.
Which mean nothing to him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Ayatollah speaks the language of God and divine authority. He doesn't care about GDP. The source's hope, and it's a slim one, is that Putin, using the language of religious authority, orthodoxy versus Shia Islam, could challenge the Ayatollah's spiritual rigidity in a way a Western leader never, ever could.
It's like saying you need a religious leader to talk to a religious leader, even if one of them is a tyrant.
Exactly. Even if that religious leader is Vladimir Putin. It suggests a spiritual diplomacy channel that is completely outside our normal way of thinking.
It feels like an absolute Hail Mary pass.
It is. It's a desperate search for any lever, any tool that might work. It shows you just how intractable the problem is, that they are looking to Moscow for a spiritual intervention. But, to be fair, the source pairs this with a much more pragmatic argument regarding China.
Which, I have to say, made way more sense to me. The China argument felt like traditional, cold, hard, real politics.
Right, because China doesn't care about the theology. They don't care about the crucifixion or the hidden imam or any of it.
They care about one thing.
They care about the flow of goods. They care about the Belt and Road Initiative. They care about stability. And the argument here is simple. The Islamic Republic is chaotic. It's a bad business partner. It funds proxies. It disrupts shipping lanes in the Red Sea. It provokes wars.
And chaos is bad for business.
Chaos is terrible for business. A stable, democratic Iran. That's a dream for them. That's a stable market. That's 85 million educated consumers ready to buy Chinese goods. It's a reliable source of energy.
So you sell the revolution to China's merchant class.
You sell it as a business upgrade. Trade the mad mullahs for a stable republic that will honor its contracts. It's a purely transactional pitch.
Okay, so that's the high-level theoretical chess game. That's the view from 30,000 feet. But let's zoom in now, right down to the ground level. Section 3, the diaspora. Because while these blog posts are being written, people are actually putting their bodies on the line.
The force for change, as the source calls them. And this is really the beating heart of the 2026 situation. This is where the energy is coming from.
We mentioned the 100,000 in Berlin. But why the diaspora? Usually when we talk about revolutions, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Arab Spring, we focus on the people inside the country. Why does this stack place so much weight on the people who have already left?
That's a really good question, and the answer is purely practical. It's because they are the only ones who have the bandwidth to organize safely.
What do you mean by bandwidth?
Think about the mechanics of protest inside Iran.
Mm.
If you are in Tehran or Isfahan and you try to organize a rally of 100,000 people, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Basya militia will shut you down before you even start.
You'll never get there.
Never. They will arrest the leaders, they will cut the internet, and they will likely shoot into the crowd before you even get the microphone set up. The cost of entry is too high inside. You die before you can speak.
Whereas in Berlin.
In Berlin, in London, in Los Angeles, you are safe. You get permits. You have police protection. The source argues this creates a profound moral obligation. The diaspora has to be the voice for the voiceless. They are the megaphone for the people trapped inside.
So when 100,000 people march in Berlin, it forces the German chancellor to look. It forces the BBC and CNN to cover it.
And, thanks to technology, which we'll get to, the people inside Iran see those images. And that is the key.
It breaks the isolation.
It shatters it. It tells the kid in Tehran who feels completely alone, you are not alone, the world sees you, the diaspora is with you. It boosts morale, which is the absolute fuel of any revolution.
But it's not just peaceful marching, is it? Reports from London in January 2026 describe clashes. This isn't just a quiet vigil. We have accounts of protesters physically tearing down the flag of the Islamic Republic from the embassy.
That is such a visceral image. Think about the symbolism of that act. An embassy is legally sovereign territory. Tearing down that flag is an act of war, essentially. It's a total rejection of authority. It says, you do not represent us. You are occupiers of our country.
And these protests are not happening in a vacuum. The reports also mention counter-protests. And this is where it gets really messy and complicated for a Western observer. The reports mention friction with pro-Palestinian groups.
This is a very confusing dynamic for a lot of people in the West. You'd think, why would pro-Palestinian groups clash with anti-regime Iranians? Aren't they both generally against oppression? Aren't they on the same side?
Right. On the surface, they seem like they should be natural allies.
It's a collision of narratives. The Iranian regime, for 40 years, has framed itself as the leader of the axis of resistance against Israel. They are the ones who fund Hamas. They fund Islamic Jihad. They fund Hezbollah.
So some of these pro-Palestinian groups...
Some of them view the regime as a necessary ally, or at the very least, a necessary counterweight to Israel and the U.S. in the region. So for them, an attack on the Iranian regime is seen as weakening the Palestinian cause.
Whereas the Iranian protesters see it completely differently.
100% the opposite. The Iranian protesters argue that the regime is using Palestinians as pawns. They say the regime doesn't care about you, they're just using your cause to justify their own military expansion and to distract from their crimes at home. They shout slogans like, neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life only for Iran.
Wow.
It creates a very, very volatile mix on the streets of London or Paris.
And who is leading this charge both in Berlin and London? The sources are really clear on this point.
It's the women. Always. The gender dynamics are absolutely central to this. This is not your grandfather's revolution. This is the woman life freedom movement.
It's in the name.
It's literally the slogan. Women are the primary organizers. They're the ones on the front lines mirroring the situation inside Iran, where women are the ones burning their headscarves and facing down the security forces. It's a direct rejection of a system that is legally, religiously, and socially built on gender apartheid.
So it's not just political, it's deeply personal. It's about bodily autonomy.
Precisely. It's about the right to exist as a full human being.
Okay, so we have the theory and we have the foot soldiers on the streets. Now we need to talk about the generals, the people with the plans. The sources profile two very distinct leadership figures who are, in a way, vying for the soul of this revolution.
They are.
Let's start with the one most Westerners might recognize by name, or at least by his title, Reza Pahlavi.
The Crown Prince, son of the last Shah who was deposed in the 1979 revolution.
He's based here in the U.S., and his strategy is what he calls the Lion and Sun Revolution. Now, immediately, the critics are going to say, okay, this guy just wants his throne back. He wants to be the king. But looking at his statements in this stack, he seems to be very carefully dodging that specific framing.
He walks a very, very fine line. He has to. He knows that the word monarchy is a dirty word to some Iranians, but it's a nostalgic dream to others.
A return to a better...
A return to a more secular, prosperous time in their view. So he positions himself as a caretaker, not as a king in waiting. His argument is essentially, I will guide the transition. I will be the umbrella under which everyone, Republicans, monarchists, leftists, can gather. I will stabilize the country, and then we will have a free and fair referendum.
Let the people decide.
Exactly. His pitch is, if you want a republic, vote for it. If you want a constitutional monarchy, like in the UK or Sweden, vote for it. But I am just the ferryman. I am not the destination.
Is that credible? I mean, is that just good political posturing, or did the sources suggest he means it?
That is the million-dollar question. It's the big debate. His supporters, the ones you hear chanting Jabed Shah or Long Live the King at the rallies, they clearly want a restoration. They want the glory days back.
And his documents.
But his emergency phase booklet, which is in this stack, focuses very heavily on logistics, not on pomp and circumstance. And this document really caught my eye.
Mine too. It's incredibly detailed. It's not just a speech about freedom. It's a manual on how do we keep the water running on day 2.
Because governance is boring until it stops working. Pahlavi knows that if the regime falls, there is a vacuum, an enormous one. And if the electricity goes out, if the food supply chains break, if the hospitals shut down...
The revolution turns into anarchy.
Exactly. And anarchy almost always leads to another dictatorship. Someone strong steps into the chaos to restore order.
To turn the lights back on.
Precisely. So his plan covers stabilizing the currency, which is in free fall. It covers maintaining the energy grids, setting up interim courts to prevent revenge killings. He's trying to show the world, and more importantly, the Iranian people, that he is a competent administrator. He's saying, I can keep the ship afloat while we figure out who the new captain should be.
And he also has a very specific two-pronged tactic for bringing the regime down in the first place. Strikes and defections.
He's targeting the wallet and the muscle of the regime. He's calling for nationwide strikes, specifically in the petroleum sector. Oil is the regime's blood. It's their only real source of hard currency.
Choke off the money supply.
If the oil stops flowing, the regime can't pay its bills, it can't pay the police, it can't pay the army. The whole system grinds to a halt.
And speaking of the army, he's set up this defections platform.
A digital portal. An online sign-up sheet, essentially. He claims in these documents that tens of thousands of current military and even IRGC members have signed up.
That's an incredibly bold claim. Sign up here to betray the regime. It sounds risky.
It is. And we have to take the numbers with a huge grain of salt because it's impossible to verify from the outside. But the logic behind it is sound. The regular army is made up of Iranian conscripts. They're just kids.
They're not true believers.
Not like the IRGC.
Yeah.
Pahlavi's message to them is, don't go down with the sinking ship. There is a place for you in the new Iran. You are the guardians of the nation, not the bodyguards of the regime. He's trying to peel away the regime's protection layer by layer.
But there is a fear here, right? A big one. If you give one man control of the military and the courts for 180 days as a caretaker, history is full of caretakers who decided they liked the house and never left.
Absolutely. Napoleon was a caretaker.
Right.
It's the classic strongman trap.
Yeah.
If Pahlavi successfully consolidates power in that interim phase, will he actually give it up? And that skepticism, that fear, is what fuels the other major faction in the opposition.
The other side of the coin. Let's talk about them. Maryam Rajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran, or the NCRI, based in France. Her strategy is called the third option.
Right. And she frames the entire world in these binaries. Option 1 is appeasement. That's Western governments shaking hands with the mullahs. She says that's failed for 40 years.
Option 2.
Option 2 is foreign war U.S. invasion. She says that's a disaster waiting to happen for all the reasons we just discussed. So her solution is option 3, internal organized resistance.
How does her resistance differ from Pahlavi's mobilization? Because to an outsider, it just sounds like the same thing, people fighting the power.
It's structurally very, very different. Pahlavi's relying on a mass wave, a tidal wave of popular anger. General strikes, everyone in the street, a spontaneous pouring out of the population. Rajavi argues that the regime is far too brutal and organized for that to work on its own.
She thinks that wave will just get crushed.
She argues that spontaneous protests get crushed every time. She says you can't fight a disciplined army with an angry mob.
So what's her alternative?
Resistance units. These are small, organized, disciplined cells inside Iran. Think less like a mass protest and more like the French resistance in World War II.
Combat ready, she calls them in the documents.
Yes, it's a much more militant and frankly more hierarchical structure. She argues that you can't just wait for the army to defect. You have to actively confront the IRGC. You have to break their control through organized acts of defiance, sabotage, and information warfare. You need a hierarchy. You need discipline. You need a plan.
And she has a plan. She has her own roadmap, the 10-point plan.
And on paper, if you're a Western diplomat, it ticks every single box you could want. A secular republic, complete separation of church and state, total gender equality, a non-nuclear Iran, a free market economy. It's a manifesto designed to appeal to Western parliaments.
It's basically her application for the job of the democratic alternative.
It is. It says, we are the organized, pro-Western, democratic alternative you've been looking for all these years.
But we can't ignore the elephant in the room here. The MEK, the group at the core of the NCRI, is polarizing. That's the polite word for it.
That's putting it very mildly. They have a complex, very difficult and controversial history. They were originally a leftist Islamic group that actually helped overthrow the Shah in '79 before turning on the mullahs almost immediately.
They spent years on Western terrorist lists.
They did, though they were removed over a decade ago now. And they operate with a level of internal discipline and devotion to their leadership that some critics, and even former members, describe as cult-like.
So the monarchists, Pahlavi supporters, they look at the MEK and see dangerous radicals.
Yes. The monarchists see them as former Marxists who can't be trusted. And the MEK, in turn, looks at the monarchists and sees them as entitled elites who just want to restore another dictatorship.
And this fragmentation, this infighting, is the regime's greatest insurance policy.
Absolutely, 100%. As long as Pahlavi and Rajavi are fighting each other for the title of leader of the opposition, they aren't fully focusing their combined energy on the regime. The regime loves this. They watch the opposition tear itself apart and they just sit back.
Is there anyone trying to bridge this gap? This brings us to Section 6, the United Front. Or, more accurately, the lack thereof. Because if these two major camps can't get along, who else is there in the mix?
Okay, there are other major figures trying to operate above that specific political fray. Shireen Ebadi is a key one.
The Nobel Peace Prize laureate.
Exactly. She carries immense moral authority. She focuses purely on the legal and human rights dimension of the struggle. She isn't trying to run the country. She's trying to stop the bleeding.
How does she do that?
When the regime shoots unarmed protesters, she's the one filing the briefs at the UN and the International Criminal Court. She provides the legal legitimacy for international intervention. She forces the international community to acknowledge that these aren't just protests, these are crimes against humanity.
She's the conscience of the movement, in a way.
That's a good way to put it. And then you have Mazialinejad. I feel like everyone who follows this even a little bit knows her. The flower in her hair, the passionate speeches, the direct challenges to the regime.
She is a powerhouse, a force of nature.
She is. And she's the bridge between the West and the raw domestic anger inside Iran. She understands the social media age better than anyone. Her My Stealthy Freedom campaign years ago, where women filmed themselves taking off their hijabs, that really planted the seeds for the woman life freedom movement.
She's also urging U.S. intervention, but in a very specific way, not with troops.
No, with disruption. She wants the U.S. to use its cyber capabilities to break the regime's censorship infrastructure. She's saying, don't send soldiers, send hackers. Help us break their tools of digital repression. Give us the internet.
But we also have to talk about the ethnic dimension. This is so important. Iran isn't just one homogeneous Persian entity, it's a mosaic.
This is crucial, and it's so often overlooked in the West. You have large populations of Kurds, Balokis, Arabs, Azeris, and they have their own leaders, like Abdullah Muhtadi of the Komala Party, representing the Kurdish region.
And their concerns are different.
Their argument is that a centralized Persian democracy isn't enough. They don't want to trade a mullah in Tehran for a president in Tehran who still tells them what to do.
They want federalism.
They want local autonomy. They want to speak their own languages in schools, run their own local governments. They want a say in how the resources from their lands are used.
And the regime exploits this fear, right? This fear of the country breaking apart.
Ruthlessly. It's one of their main propaganda points.
Yeah.
They tell the Persian majority, if we fall, the Kurds will separate, the Balokis will separate, and Iran will break apart into 5 tiny, weak pieces. It's a classic divide-and-conquer strategy.
So the opposition's challenge is to prove that's not true.
They have to. The opposition has to prove that a federal Iran can remain a united Iran. They have to sell a vision of unity in diversity, not unity through force.
Let's zoom out again. Section 7. Geopolitical ripples. Because if this regime actually starts to crumble, or even if it just gets desperate, it affects everyone. From the price of gas at the pump in Ohio to the shipping lanes in the Gulf.
The source notes the regime's aggressive posture. It's a very predictable pattern. When they feel cornered at home by protests, they lash out abroad. It's a classic distraction tactic. Look at the enemy outside, not the poverty and repression inside.
The sources mention specific threats to the UAE and Qatar.
Yes. The analogy used in one report is that the regime treats its neighbors exactly like it treats its own citizens. Comply, or we will hurt you. It's basically extortion diplomacy. They threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz, they fly drones over neighboring capitals, they activate their proxies.
But the biggest flashpoint, the one that could ignite the whole region, is obviously Israel.
The source is very blunt about this. It's not subtle at all. They argue the regime sees the Palestinian cause not as a humanitarian issue, but as a strategic beachhead.
A staging ground, a forward operating base.
Exactly. The argument is that the IRGC funds Hamas and Hezbollah not because they care deeply about liberating Palestinians, but to ensure they have a permanent firing position aimed at Tel Aviv. It's about leverage. It's about threatening Israel.
So if the regime in Tehran falls,
the funding for those proxies dries up overnight. The money, the weapons, the training, it's gone.
so that's the global stability argument for regime change. You cut the head off the octopus and the tentacles, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, they lose their nerve center.
Exactly. Without Iranian money and Iranian rockets, those groups change fundamentally. They don't disappear, but they are significantly weakened. The entire security architecture of the Middle East shifts in a day.
But the path to that collapse is messy. And the source warns about something it calls the Starlink factor. We touched on this earlier, the internet blackouts.
It's a genuine game changer. Pahlavi mentions it explicitly in his strategy documents. The regime's #1 weapon against protests is the internet kill switch. You can't communicate, you can't organize. You can't say, meet at the square at 5 p.m.
And you can't upload the video of the police beating someone to death. You can't get the evidence out.
Right? Starlink, or any satellite internet service, completely bypasses the local infrastructure. It beams the internet down directly from space. It keeps the revolution online. It allows those videos of brutality to get out to the world, and it allows coordination and messages of support to get in.
It prevents the regime from committing its crimes in the dark.
Which brings us to the cost, the final section, Section 8. And we can't gloss over this. The sources aren't just talking about abstract strategy. They are counting bodies. This is not a bloodless, peaceful transition.
The numbers cited for the 2025-2026 period alone are staggering. The sources mention estimates of 35,000 to 40,000 protester deaths. That's not a protest anymore. That is a war against your own people.
It's a massacre. It's a series of mass killings designed to terrorize the population back into silence. We are talking about a level of violence that borders on civil war. The regime is using heavy weaponry against civilians. They are shooting to kill.
And yet, despite that horrific cost, both Pahlavi and Rajavi believe the clock is ticking on the regime. They think this is the end, despite the bodies, despite the fear.
They both see what they call strategic failure. The economy is destroyed, the currency is worthless, the social contract is broken. But most importantly, the ideology, the core belief in the supreme leader and the Islamic Republic is gone for the vast majority of the population, especially the youth.
And the fear barrier has broken.
That's the key point, isn't it? The fear barrier. When people are willing to face machine guns in the street because they feel they have nothing left to lose, the regime has lost its primary weapon. Terror only works if people are afraid to die.
When people accept death as a possible price of freedom, the dictator is in real trouble.
Deep trouble.
So for the listener sitting at home, maybe listening to this in their car and wondering, okay, this is tragic, this is intense, but why does it matter to me? What is the final verdict from these sources? Why should the average person care about what's happening on the streets of Tehran?
It matters because a democratic Iran, according to these sources, changes the entire trajectory of the 21st century.
That's a huge statement. How so?
Geopolitically, as we said, it stabilizes the most volatile region on Earth. It secures energy supplies, which stabilizes the global economy. No more threats to the Strait of Hormuz. Economically, it opens a massive, educated, young market of 85 million people. But morally, it would be the first time in modern history that a totalitarian Islamist theocracy is overthrown by a secular, democratic, grassroots movement led by women.
It sends a signal to every other dictator on the planet, you are not safe.
And it sends a signal to every oppressed population. It is possible. It would be a Profound victory for the idea that democracy isn't just a Western concept, it's a universal human desire.
We've covered so much ground. We have a regime on the ropes, a diaspora mobilizing in historic numbers, and a detailed roadmap for the future that is fiercely contested by the people who wrote it.
The pieces are all on the board. The question is the sequence. It's about timing. Can the opposition unify before the regime cracks down completely and crushes them? Can this idea of dialogue actually work alongside brutal street battles?
And that brings me to our final thought. The source, Brockface, insists that dialogue is the necessary precursor to change. But here is the question I want to leave you with, and it's a haunting one that the documents raise. If the regime is truly driven by an ideology that views compromise as weakness and views martyrdom and death as preferable to defeat, as the source argues, is dialogue actually a tool for peace?
Or is it just a stalling tactic? Is it something that allows the regime to reload, to regroup, while the West feels good about talking?
Can you reason with someone whose entire worldview is fundamentally and violently incompatible with yours? Or does there come a point where talk simply ends and history takes over?
That's the core of it. And looking at the diaspora, this whole idea of an outside-in revolution, can it really work? Can 100,000 people marching in the cold in Berlin truly tip the scales for 85 million people inside Iran?
Or is it a beautiful, tragic gesture that ultimately can't change the facts on the ground?
That is the experiment we're watching unfold in these documents.
We're watching history in real time, or at least in the real time of these sources. February 2026 might just be the turning point. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Until next time, stay curious.